Hi, I'm Julie Woodward with the Oregon Forest Resources Institute. It's my pleasure to be your host for today's Tree School Online webinar. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Tree School Online is a production of the OSU Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program and the Partnership for Forestry Education. We want to give recognition to the Oregon Forest Resources Institute for contributing to this project and to the U.S. Forest Service and the Oregon Department of Forestry for providing a grant. Tree School Online webinars are offered every first and third Tuesday of the month through June of 2021. And you can visit the Tree School Online page on knowyourforest.org, the website to find updates and to register for the next few classes. Many of you have probably been on Zoom already, but if you need to, you can use your Zoom toolbar. It should be located at the bottom or top of your screen. And many features can be accessed from the toolbar. Your audio and video is turned off for all participants. We ask that you ask questions through the Q&A box. You can find those on the toolbar, and I'll be monitoring this throughout the webinar. So please feel free to put questions in there, and we have a couple places that we'll pause to, John will answer questions. If you have another issue or general comment or something you'd like to convey to us, you're welcome to put that in the chat. And thanks to Amanda Brenner from OSU is going to help monitor that. And we'll also be posting some useful links and other resources in the chat box. The resources available for this class are on the online class guide page, which you can easily reach from the Tree School Online page on the knowyourforest.org. You just click on the webinar description, then look for the webinar you're looking for, and it says instructor resources. We are recording these webinars, and they'll be archived as a YouTube video and available to watch in the future, or if you want to recommend it to someone else to also watch. We also have a poll at the beginning and the end just to help us get some information about the audience. If you don't see the poll pop up, you can also click on the poll button and participate in that along with us at the beginning and end. And today I want to introduce you to the presentation is going to be on managing your forest with fire in mind, part 2. And I want to introduce you to Dr. John Bailey. And Dr. John Bailey is a professor of silviculture and fire management in the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. He attained his BS and MF degrees from Virginia Tech as a native Virginian in the 1980s. Then he worked for 6+ years with the Environmental Protection Agency in Corvallis on forest stressors. He completed a PhD at Oregon State University and joined the faculty at Northern Arizona University in 1996, where he worked in Ponderosa Pine silviculture, fuels management, and ecological restoration. He returned to OSU in 2006 to continue research on fuels, fire management, and sustainable forestry and drier, fire-prone forest types, as well as multi-story management in mixed forest types for broad ecosystem objectives. His recent research and outreach focus is on landscape scale, wildfire risk, and how to use sustainable forest management to minimize the adverse impacts of future wildfire in uncertain climatic times. So with that, I welcome Dr. John Bailey to the Tree School Online webinars and appreciate him being here with us today. And we're going to launch the poll. So John and I can get a little bit more about where all of you are at today. And if you're a landowner, woodland owner, resource professional. And while that is up and you select from those 3 questions, I'm going to ask John to share a little bit more about what we're going to hear about today.
Good. Thank you, Julie. And what a treat. This program is great. It's just an honor to be able to come on and share some information with everyone, and a chance to hear your questions. And I'm going to try to leave time in order to be able to adequately address those questions. So what I'm going to cover, let me advance the slide here, is kind of this idea of a second presentation where you had Amanda Rao and some others come on and give kind of an introduction to many of these topics around wildfire. So I'm going to revisit that in terms of a sequel, but then also do a little deeper dive into where I see our out, how we can break the pattern that we've been in for a while. Oh, very interesting. Most people are the Willamette Valley.
Yeah, so we have, thanks, John. So we have people that look like from primarily Willamette Valley, but also on the coast and some Washington and one in some other place of the U.S. So expanding across borders. And about themselves, most of them are woodland owners. We also have some private natural resource professionals, agency, nonprofit, and a few others. And it also looks like how many acres of forest land do you own or manage is kind of across the board with either from 0 and a few, even that over 1,000 acres. So pretty wide demographics of land ownership. So thanks again for joining us today, and we will look forward to hearing what you can share with us here in part 2. Thanks.
Great. So just a little bit more, about me. I've been working in this field since when I was a student at Virginia Tech, and was a part of a firefighting crew. And then over the years, a little bit of additional prescribed burning types of training and experience. But it really was in 2017 with the Eagle Creek fire that it dawned on me that we were not making a lot of progress on this. And this is a theme I'll come back to a couple times today. And so I kind of redoubled, tripled, quadrupled my efforts to do these kinds of outreach things, including to the media, and just get more of the information out. And so I took a ride in an airplane while the Eagle Creek fire was still burning. But I can tell you, I'm a lot more comfortable on the ground with a drip torch than I am riding around in an airplane. So what I'm going to cover today is just a quick review, and a lot faster than I usually do it. But again, we can come back and I can answer questions. And I think it'll put the 2020 fire season in perspective if we revisit some of those basic concepts today. But then actually take a little break at that point and then come back and really talk a little bit more in detail about what can we do now, and then ultimately answer your questions at the end. So I'm going to use this metaphor of fuel building up on the landscape being like a beaver dam, homage to Oregon State University. In reality, however, it really is a huge reservoir of fuel that we've now stacked on our landscape, and that is starting to drain uncontrollably. And the question is going to be whether or not we turn the corner and start draining this reservoir in a little more controlled fashion. So let's get on to that review. First off, it's all based on the fire behavior triangle. And yes, it's all complex, particularly when you bring in humans and social systems into it. But let's always step back to just the basics of physics and chemistry for what's really going on, and therefore what we can do, what we can change in terms of our behavior. The fire behavior triangle is rooted in the interaction of topography, weather, and fuels. Topography, slope is particularly important, these steep slopes and canyons and those kinds of things. Weather, of course, wind, relative humidity, temperature to a certain extent. That's those variables allow us to model fire behavior out on the hillsides pretty darn well. But we have that interaction component with fuels that sit on the topography that interact with the weather and on different time scales and spatial scales. And the good news being fuels is one part of the fire behavior triangle that we not only need to understand, but we can actually manipulate that one in order to manipulate fire intensity. And most of the time, if we vary fire intensity, then it varies the impact, the severity that it has out on the hillsides. And so, for me, we always have to remember that fuels component on the side. And I think if we go back thousands of years and our native ancestors on the Western landscapes, they understood the fire behavior triangle and knew that every year we have a fire season. And, they knew how to manage fire on steep slopes versus flat ground, and when to choose different conditions in order to get the impacts and the severities that they wanted. And so that's why our forest, evolved. With fire as a key component to it. The vast majority, 90-some% of the acres and almost all of our forest types have fire as a fundamental component in it. And of course, the big two, Ponderosa Pine and Douglas Fir, are fire species. We changed that relationship with fire and fuels with Euro-American settlers Those ancestors came into this part of the world in a fairly fuel limited landscape. They changed how much fire was on the landscape. There was a lot more emphasis, of course, on housing and settlement and infrastructure, but also on growing trees and having a denser forest. And an explicit part of the Forest Service mission, for example, for a long time was put out fire. Fire was viewed not as a creative force, but as solely a destructive force. And so we had a very effective fire suppression policy in place for many, many decades. I was actually part of that all the way up to the 1980s, and when I trained and was a firefighter and that kind of thing. But that's kind of what's catching up with us now. But we know there was a lot more fire on the landscape, right? Ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, other fire adapted, fire prone parts of the landscape, based on fire scars and charcoals in lakes and written records and old photographs and the age structure of stands and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if folks want to argue about it, I'm glad to show data and argue more about it. But there was a whole lot of fire on the landscape, and we largely stopped that. And so what that has driven is the accumulation of hazard, that reservoir of fuel on the landscape. And so most of our acres have more fuel on them than they've ever had. We've created forest types and structural conditions that actually have never existed in 15,000 years. And what that hazard has done has also it's more connected than it's ever been. And so when you take that hazard and you connect it, and then you start to multiply it by the probability that it's going to burn, and then the things that it's going to impact in terms of values, both in the forest and next to the forest, that's the formula for calculating risk and impact for what these wildfires are going to do. And if hazard is going up and probability is staying the same or going up, and values are staying the same and or going up, I would argue all of those things are going up, then that means the risk of being impacted by wildfire is going up. And our last multiplier, and it relates to that probability, is climate change and the length of fire seasons. Pretty consistently in the Pacific Northwest, the fire season is 30 days longer now. In some places, they say 60 days. Our colleagues in California, they don't even hardly talk about fire seasons anymore. They're always in a fire season down there. And so, that is what influences these probabilities. It influences kind of the resources that we can put towards fires, but it also changes the intensity of the fires when they burn. That was part of the equation with the Labor Day fires last year. We were right at the end of the fire season, and there was a lot of fuel ready to burn, in addition to those weather conditions that developed, in addition to multiple ignition sources out there. And that's what drove a high severity event as well. And the projections for climate change, at least warming, is only going up. And so there's a clear record that fire season, drought indices of different types and calculations, all that science is coming in that shows there's been a big change since the 80s and the 90s. And then all the projections are that things will be getting warmer, and it's pretty easy to model that our fire seasons will continue getting longer and deeper, and fuels will be drier. So that's all the bad news, right? And that's kind of what came together last Labor Day and created this kind of scenario, unprecedented in many ways, but not unpredictable. And you don't necessarily need to be a doomsday prophet to talk about that. Nor do I have to be a prophet to talk about. That's not the last time we've seen this. As a matter of fact, it's spooky. I look back at one of my media interviews after Eagle Creek and the campfire in Paradise, California, and I had the quote on K2 News that we have hundreds of these kinds of communities, on both sides of the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and it's just a matter of time before they burn. And that's what unfolded last year. So that's the doomy kind of part and the evidence that we have for it. But there are things we can do. Remember, we have one side of the fire behavior triangle that we can actually regulate in terms of fuels and how those fuels are available in time and space. So that is some good news to share with you today. And it's going to be part of something bigger than what is just fire management. It really is going to be part of it, I think, of a change in our profession and a change in the wider society in terms of how we view our forest. Our forest, particularly in Oregon, are just remarkable things, as you guys know. Many of you own the land, and you own it for a host of reasons, starting with just its intrinsic spiritual value, but also scenery and recreation. It's the source of 80% of our clean water, a whole range of wildlife habitat, the charismatic stuff and the endangered stuff, but really, all of the biodiversity. We're doing more and more work on pollinators all the time. So it's a life habitat in addition to wildlife habitat. It's also wood and timber and carbon, things that have easy, quantifiable economic values, and that can be passed from generations to generations. So forests are at the heart of who we are and what we do here in Oregon. And we're at the end of a period where we kind of forgot that they're also fuels. They are all those things. They're all those things at once, and they're also fuel, and they're going to burn. Where we used to view these wildfires as separate events and incidences, it's called an incident when it gets called in. So our language betrays us in terms of how we have viewed fire. It's not one thing. A big fire isn't going to happen once in a forester's career anymore. They're happening essentially every year. And so, we just have to change. We have to remember that our landscapes are fuel. We have to realize the inevitability of fire, that fire is not a single incident. It's something that comes and goes in time. And it's part of the natural world in addition to part of the human world. And we've just got to figure out how to blend all those things. It's like cold, wet, rainy winters. We know that's coming, and we plan around that in terms of everything we do, from our houses to our clothing to our activities and all that kind of stuff. We just have to remember that summers are dry and hot and smoky, and things are going to burn, and make those kind of adaptations then. So after we take the break, we're going to really focus on what are these things that we can do in terms of mechanical removal and prescribed fire and fire use, and what we can do after fire, for example, last year's. So I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm just going to promise to come back to it and just point you to a couple more resources and make a few more points before we take a little break. First off, we have a new fire extension program with a wonderful website. That link is available to you guys that would review a whole lot of this information. If you're really jazzed about topographic effects on fire behavior, you can probably find that information there. If you're interested in programs for how you might do this or that fuels treatment, there's going to be more information there. Prescribed burning, local collaboratives, those kinds of things. It's a wonderful resource, engageable at a number of different levels. So I encourage you to take a look at it. There's also a link to the National Fire Protection Association website, much more focused on the homeowners and home safety zones and those kinds of things, the FireWise program. That link is also available to you for looking at that kind of information. And I can answer some questions about it as well if we want to get into that today. But I want to talk about some of the promise and the scale of this issue, however. So this is the Southern Blue Mountains, the Blue Mountain Forest Partners Group. And a student colleague of mine, James Johnston, has worked with that group for over a decade now, and has been part of this ramp up over period with federal funding through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Program, through having a very active community collaborative group where the mill owners and the foresters and the ranchers, but also just the general public and the environmental community have been active in trying to address this issue of wildfire risk and doing these fuels treatments proactively. So this is one, in my opinion, one of the better examples in the nation for groups that have been active. They had the advantage of already being in place. They had funding. They have Forest Service personnel that were ready to really address this issue. And you can see with the purple bars, the purple is actual mechanical fuels treatments. Most of them followed up with prescribed burning as well in order to start addressing acres out there to be treated. And so they've gotten up to doing 20,000 acres a year of fuels treatments, mechanical treatment and prescribed burning out there. Just a great success until you consider that it's 1.6 million acres is what this area is to address. So on a spatial scale, they're getting at it. It's been 9 years and the acres are starting to add up, but this is not enough. And if you really want to kind of model this going forward and think about the history of fire and the density of the fuel, the trees and other fuels that are out there and wildfire risk, it's probably 3 to 4 times. Even though this is one of the best examples, they should have been doing 3 or 4 times as much. Along came the Canyon Creek fire. Some of you might remember it in 2015. That was in this area. That is that most of the fire perimeter in that area now was that one fire. No fatalities, but some of these red areas that were high severity fire out there. But also a lot of other severity fire, thanks to some of that treatment history, thanks to just inherently low fuel conditions, given the land management history, or that it was just the middle of the night, or that it was after the weather changed and you had some big runs on hot, dry, windy days, but then for weeks, the Canyon Creek fire burned around, burning at mixed to low severity, doing what might be considered good restoration work in and of itself. And so most of that was in 1 year. There have been a couple other small fires, but cumulatively, over time, only about 1.5% of the area has burned in high severity over that 9 years, better part of a decade. We've treated about 15%, but 6-7% also was treated with just wildfire itself. But again, 9 years, probably in that 10, 15, 20 years, you would want to be able to, pretty well cover the entire landscape. And we've done just about 20% of it. So that's where that number of we need to be doing 3, 4, 5 times as much. And not everyone's doing as good a job as these guys. So we've got that's the history and kind of synopsis of my message today, without getting into details about what these treatments might look at. But I wanted to pause at this point and take some questions, and then we can take a little break as well about just some of these foundational issues. And did I stir up anything, get anybody upset based on what I said? And someone wants to argue about fire scars or something.
Wow. John's putting down the gauntlet.
Boom.
So Paula asks, can you address the relationship to how a fire impacts a forest based on the size of trees? So like a very densely planted stand of maybe 10 to 20-year-old versus like an older growth.
Yeah, very nice. So it is complex because it's more than just the trees that are out there. And so what I want you to picture, and we could even pull up our offline, we can pull up and look at some different examples. We really talk about fuel beds or fuel models, and these are not computer models. It's more like airplane models that you assembled as a kid. A physical construct of what all the fuels look like together. And an important part of them is often trees, but they're also the branches of the trees at different heights, The amount of shrub in the understory, the amount of grass, the range of tree size, in addition to the total amount of vegetation that's out there. So I think what's driving this question is kind of that gnawing issue, and it was the immediate response to those Labor Day fires that burned through both public land with lower density, more mature forest with larger trees, and industry land that had a lot of acres of plantation, smaller trees, and more evenly spaced and being grown purposefully that way. So we see a lot of high severity fire in those plantations for a number of different reasons. One is we've gotten away from prescribed burning for site prep. So a lot of fuel gets left behind following harvesting. And as a matter of fact, some of that fuel is activity fuel actually associated with the harvesting activity. So as we've become more reliant on chemical site prep before planting, we're leaving more of the fuel on these sites. And so then we have small susceptible trees. The trees themselves are not a lot of fuel, but if they're planted in a bunch of dead fuel and or have a whole lot of shrub fuel that has regrown in, let's say, 10 or 15 years, so that they're small trees in a sea of fuel, it's one of those fuel beds or fuel models that is very flammable, burns very hot. And younger trees, smaller trees with crowns closer to the ground and thinner bark don't stand a chance. And so you have near 100% mortality under those situations. In more mature, perhaps federally owned or small woodland owner owned forests, the trees of lower density, more widely spaced, or at least having some gaps in them, the trees are bigger, and so their bark is thicker, and their foliage is further off the ground, particularly if there's been a mowing program or a prescribed burning program that's eliminated some of the surface fuels there. So you have a low surface fuel load, you have larger trees, the canopy of those trees is further away from the surface fuels. Those are the kind of conditions that even when it's hot and dry and windy, the embers or the advancing flaming front gets in there, but it doesn't kill every tree. That's where you get a mixed or low severity fire. But that's not to say that all federal lands are that way, because a whole lot of federal lands not only have that large tree, more mature component, it's been infilled by a whole lot of other fuel, and fuel has accumulated thanks to a century of fire suppression and fire exclusion. I mean, if we put fire out here, if we suppress fire here, that keeps it from flowing into other areas. So I tend to use the word fire exclusion. So these areas that haven't burned have just accumulated fuel day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Stuff is just growing. Some of it decomposes, but by and large, 90% of it is there accumulating year to year. And so these are just massive fuel accumulations. And maybe they don't burn as fast, and it's a very different burning dynamic than that plantation example that I talked about, but it still kills all the trees. And so there are plenty of federal acres that are burn at high severity as well, essentially 100% mortality. And then we flip that coin over. Not every plantation gets killed. All the trees get killed, because if there's a really good job, particularly if you look at older plantations or areas where we used burning as a site preparation tool, you've got young trees with thin bark and crowns close to the ground, but over essentially bare dirt. Because of some really good site prep. You can throw a lot of embers in there, and it doesn't spread very much. It doesn't build up to much heat. And so even small trees fare pretty well. I think you could put 1,000 seedlings per acre in little pots out in a Walmart parking lot, and go at it with a blast furnace, and the seedlings are going to be fine. There's just not enough heat there for it. So it's the entire fuel bed that these different sized trees are arranged in. Long answer, but a really important point. And so I did a deep dive in on that.
That's okay. I think you kind of covered some of our other questions, but someone expressed kind of a frustration of getting land from a large industrial landowner that, we've had a practice of maybe pretty heavily density and planning, just, to account for loss of seedlings, browse, seedling loss. But we've had really great success maybe at reforestation. And so do we see those practices changing, or, how is that different for small landowners who are looking maybe at this through the lens that you're talking about today?
Yeah, my industry colleagues, I think, are recognizing the things that they really could have done better, and particularly this chemical site prep versus prescribed fire site prep, and the amount of energy, stored energy that's being left out on the hillside. So it's a smart group of people. They're very interested in sustainable land management and being able to carry a crop into the future. And so I think unquestionably, those procedures will be, and policies will be changing. And if you have bought some of that land and it's still over dense, then yes, there are things you can do right away to start fixing it up, making it a little bit more resistant and resilient to fire. And that's really what we'll talk about after this break. How much has fire severity changed on the west side? Yes, that's a science is catching up really quickly, because even when I first moved here in the 80s for the first time, the Douglas fir, and I was really into kind of the wet forest mindset, and you can even see in the literature sometimes the Douglas fir was called the asbestos forest. But then even with my PhD work, I saw a lot of charcoal out there and fire scars, and so I started thinking about how real that was. And now the science done by myself and my program and others, I think I can pretty safely say that Douglas fir, and including Douglas fir western hemlock areas, saw a lot of fires, multiple fires per century. And in areas without western hemlock is an indicator that it was probably 3 or 4 times per century historically. So where there is Douglas fir, there is a fire history. Right along the coast with western hemlock and Sitka spruce, not going to find a whole lot of charcoal. Those are those kind of conditions that burned every 300 or 400 years, what we used to think with Douglas fir. But when those forests burned every 300 or 400 years, the Douglas fir burned hot. But it burned multiple times per century in between those kinds of events. And that's what the fire scars show, and the age reconstructions and all that kind of stuff. Because if you don't get fire, you get western hemlock. Every disturbance out there other than fire helps western hemlock. So there was a lot more fire on the west side, and that's part of what we're seeing now, to answer Glenn's question.
So Jennifer asked, what are good guys to use to leave enough wood for wildlife, but eliminate fuels that would start fires?
Good. I'm not sure there's a number, or that number would really vary by slope, aspect, proximity to the Willamette Valley, where you really are in terms of rain patterns and those kinds of things. Because the more infrequent the fire that came through those areas or will come through in the future, the higher the probability that you can carry wood for higher amounts of wood and longer into the future. So let me try to re-explain that with examples. The pre-settlement Ponderosa pine forest had snags and downed wood, but very low amounts of it, because it was burning 2 or 3 times per decade with low intensity surface fire. And this one fire or 2 successive fires might miss burning up this or that snag, but the probabilities just catch up with snags and down wood. That the timing of the fire, the conditions of the burn, how the fire actually spreads will actually ignite the snag or the log, and then it'll smolder combustion over the next few days. The good news is that created a safe site for seedlings, as we look at age reconstructions and spatial patterns in Ponderosa pine. And I think in many ways, Willamette Valley, Oregon white oak, Gary oak, was very similar to that in terms of the frequency of fire and how much dead wood could even survive the probabilities over time. But as you start moving away from that most frequent fire, then those snags can survive longer. and the large wood, and maybe at that point you climb into, at any one slice in time, 3, 4, 5 snags, per acre. If you hit a cycle with a lot of fire, that number might drop down to just 1 or 2 per acre, and a bunch of the logs may be consumed. But as we do old growth reconstruction, in some of the first permanent plots that went into H.J. Andrews and others looking at logs, there's a lot of charcoal, but there was also a lot of logs in that old forest. There's a lot more now than there were when we first started doing work there 50 years ago, because we've been keeping fire out. Although I guess the Holiday Farm fire got close or caught some of it. So that's going to give us a research opportunity. But the bottom line is the less fire that's going to come through, the more you'd be able to carry. But I'd encourage you to look at the recommendations, wildlife species by wildlife species, as to how many snags you might want to have to provide desirable habitat. Same thing applies for like hardwood. Having just a couple hardwood trees, having a couple snags, having some down wood in some spatial pattern. Those are all just super additions for wildlife and other biodiversity, and probably things we haven't even thought of yet. And a small amount will be able to be carried into the future without it being a huge fire risk.
Great. Well, thanks, John, for those questions and answers. And I think at this point, if you want to move forward with your presentation, we'll save anything else that comes in for the end of the conversation.
All right. Woo! Good. Did I do okay?
You're doing great.
Thank you. All right, so let's get right at that, what we can do. So I want to drop back to this slide and then piece by piece tackle this issue of mechanical removal. The question came up about, now you have some industry land that's way dense. I think those kinds of situations, you can't just reintroduce prescribed burning. You're going to have to go in and do something mechanical first. And so we'll talk about that in a couple different approaches. Fire itself, it's interesting. The fire is the risk, but it's also in our toolbox. And so we get to revisit that age-old concept of fire as both the destroyer and the creator. And so in this case, we want to rebalance that relationship to take advantage of fire as the creator. But then where high severity wildfire, does catch up with us, there's only so much work that can be done so fast. So we're gonna have a lot of wildfire in the next 10 years, even if we turn loose with incredible new federal and statewide funding to do fuels treatments and prescribed burning and smoke management laws are relaxed and all that kind of stuff. We still have to rebuild infrastructure, loggers, truckers, mills, and all that kind of stuff to do the mechanical work and the training programs for the burning crews and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to have a lot of wildfire, and we're going to be dealing with post-wildfire recovery efforts as well. And that's going to continue into the future, undoubtedly. Mechanical, first context for it. 2 points. One is this effort that I was involved in a number of years ago, published it in 2016, where we really were starting to get into that mindset of why does it seem like this problem just continues to get worse, and yet we're still suppressing wildfire? And so we published this paper that it's actually a form of a pathology to feel this inherent need to suppress all wildfire every time. And by the way, I'm working on that national policy around wildland fire and prescribed burning. And to this day, I still hear it, particularly from retired Forest Service fire dogs, that, we just need to go back to the 10 a.m. rule and put all these fires out, as if we could, or as if we wanted to. But that sentiment is there, but it is in fact a pathology, because we know that when we put out fire, so we take a look at this. So, here's our fire suppression. And at first we thought wildfire itself was at the center of this diagram, but really it's some combination of the wildfires themselves and our vulnerability to that wildfire. When we suppress wildfire, all we do is allow more fuel to accumulate, which enhances the challenge to do future fire protection, but if we do it, it's only going to create more fuel to fuel more wildfire. And the more we promise and are successful at fire suppression and exclusion, it drives the market to develop, to have more settlement, more houses, and less prepared. The more we promise that fire is not a reality, the more people will build stupidly in the wildland-urban interface, which is going to create more flammability and drive more of a need for doing suppression and fire protection. So this human settlement increases our vulnerability directly, but also indirectly through this interaction with the need to do fire suppression. And then we have climate change sitting over here, driving ignitions and driving fuels and making them more burnable and feeding right into this as well. So there's just a number of these loops, including suppression itself, that's just making this problem worse. And I wanted to mention just yesterday in my mailbox was that NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, the folks that manage the FireWise construction, more of the wild and urban interface and homeowner FireWise kinds of thing, man, they are coming out of the box strong now, saying, what is going on? We have been talking about this for 10 or 15 years. We know what we need to do. And so they're calling it outthinking wildfire. Because it's targeting policy change, and which is, of course, going to be driven by societal change. I mean, we can't count on our legislators to do all this. It's going to take us, talking to our legislators, talking to each other and talking to our legislators to change the policies, to change this pathology that we have and that we're living in. All right, enough sermon there. So what are these things? Okay, so we got this new movement we're going to change policies, and we're actually start doing things that we're going to do 3 or 4 times more than the most successful examples so far. What is that going to be? First off, it's beyond thinning, a word it just makes me cringe sometimes reading it in the newspaper. Oh, we're going to thin and burn, thin and burn. There are so many things that are not thinning per se. And as a matter of fact, if we're only going to log, or we're only going to thin, it may actually make the fire situation worse because of those activity fuels, or depending on what we leave behind and how we do it. So we got to get beyond just the idea of thinning and really think mechanical removal of fuels in the wildland, of course, also in the wildland urban interface, where it may even be more important. If we're landowners or situations where we're thinking about even-aged management approaches and all, so that we're doing more of this tree farming approach, which is a great thing. I love it and have great colleagues working on that kind of fiber production, timber production, economic models, jobs, feeding the mills. We have a worldwide demand for wood. Wood is a renewable product. We need to replace the use of concrete and steel and bricks and cinder blocks as much as we possibly can. I could go on and on about that. We don't want to limit harvesting at this point in human history. We want to increase the amount of forest harvesting and tree growing in order to get out of this climate disaster we're headed towards. So the folks that are doing this kind of production forestry with Douglas fir and any other species worldwide, they're going to be interested in fuels management, mechanical removal of wildland fuels. And if we're going to remove it mechanically, it's great if it would have economic value. And that's going to be during the site preparation phase. Once we have a plantation out there and established, we're probably not going to go out there mechanically and work with the fuels anymore. And when we move next to prescribed burning, we're probably not going to run a prescribed fire through a young plantation as well. So if we're going to do mechanical work, or we're going to do the prescribed fire work, we're going to do it right after harvest before we put the trees out there. And that's where the science and the policy changes I foresee in the future will go towards freeing up and our ability to act during that site preparation phase. But then, particularly on federal land, we're just not doing that kind of even age management approaches anymore. And so that's going to be a multi-age approach. Many entries over time, regular entries over time. And some of those are going to be mechanical entries in order to remove fuel, particularly if we're using less fire than our ancestors, or we're burning at lower intensities than our ancestors, and or to correct the fuel accumulation reservoir that we have out there now. All of those things are going to drive, at least in the near term, some regular mechanical entries to get some of that fuel out. Good news, a lot of that fuel can have economic value for wood, for fiber, other long-term carbon storage pools, cross-laminated timber, all of those kinds of things. So you guys, this audience is probably familiar that, this is what even age management looks like with prescribed fire as part of the site prep program. So there was some piling and pile burning as well because of the fuel accumulation on the landscape. There was a little bit of scorching of our residual trees. Maybe we even burned up a snag, but we probably created a couple snags too. That kind of thing balances out. So this plantation, along with subsequent vegetation management, will move through a larger envelope in time where it's relatively safe from wildfire. Here's a multi-age approach in Ponderosa Pine. So this is Starker, by the way. Thank you, Starker, for doing great land management. This is some of my research work in Ponderosa Pine, federal lands, doing multi-age management. Went in and took out a huge number of trees. This is 10, 12 years post-treatment. And the grasses and the wildflowers and all that kind of things are happy. The seedlings that were there or that have germinated in those 10 years, particularly out in the openings, are getting pretty heavily browsed, but we have some things we can do there. And we only need one or two to become trees. We only need one or two to outgrow the deer browse every 10 years in order to provide a sustainable age structure, because these guys live hundreds of years and we're only carrying 50 to 100 per acre. So just do the math for something that will live 500 years. How many do you actually have to regenerate during you have to, over 500 years, you got to regenerate 50 to 100. That's one or two. So per decade. So that's the mechanical solution. And like I said, the good news, this is a strong economic model, spending a little bit more, perhaps, maybe a little bit less. We have a rich history of prescribed burning site prep, and could be cheaper than herbicidal site prep, but something we're going to need to do for fuels management. This is our multi-age approach, also yielding some wood over time and safely storing it on the stump between those entries, because these stands are resistant and resilient to wildfire. This is a kind of an unfamiliar model to many people. So I went ahead and pulled a little bit of data and throwing in a graph as a professor to kind of talk about one way to manage the math and the thinking around this, and a really cool point about how this varies across productivities. So this is an exercise across forest types, soil types, and productivity classes outside of Lakeview, Oregon, managing Ponderosa pine on federal land. And this curve, looking at this diameter distribution, the range of trees, and the relatively small number of trees per acre that you need in each of these diameter classes. Again, summing to between 50 and 100, depending on your productivity class out there. The math behind this is based on the total amount of basal area. So that's the combination of tree density and the relative sizes of those trees. The largest diameter class, so each of these lines is ending at a different place. The red is the most productive forest type and soil. And the quotient, or Q, is the steepness or shape of this curve. And so on the fringe of where you can grow Ponderosa pine is about 31 square feet of basal area that it carries sustainably and is still resistant and resilient to fire coming through. The trees grow pretty well. and it requires a diameter distribution about like this green line. And the trees just don't get that big. There are a few that grow on above the 16-inch diameter classes, but we just don't worry about it. It's less than 5 per acre or so. They're pretty scattered out here. They don't contribute a whole lot of basal area to this mathematics. A medium productivity site is more like 50 square feet of basal area. And therefore we get up into 20-inch trees are common. And you might have some that are up there closer to 30, like we see on the most productive Ponderosa Pine sites, where you get up really, you often have 30-inch trees are larger in a sustainable sense. And that it's reasonable to grow that size within our management plan. Slightly different curves because we have slightly different expectations about how quickly they grow from one diameter class to the next and what their mortality rates would be. But once we ran these examples, monitored these plots, modeled them out into the future, it was stunning how similar they all are in these lower diameter classes. And so how much regeneration you need to get into your 2-inch diameter class. So, how many saplings do you need in a, this is modeled as an 25-year entry cycle. So over 25 years, you need to bring approximately 13 or 14 saplings into this diameter distribution, regardless of the forest type, the soil that it's sitting on, its productivity class, and all that kind of stuff. That's the range of the amount of regeneration you need to create in those openings that are in this stand. And this is the relative expectation for how quickly they're going to advance over time and how big they'll get. And then the idea is you create growing space by maintaining this diameter distribution over time. You might get a little bump here, and so you can harvest in this area, and you can harvest or likely many of this size, they've been hit by lightning a couple times in that country. Or we otherwise just let them go or make a snag out of them if it's a landscape that needs that we think needs more snags in it or something like that. But we can't carry an unlimited number of large trees. This is the sustainable age distribution because or size and age distribution because we sometimes get carried away with the park-like stands of Ponderosa pine that are all large trees with the yellow orange bark character and all that kind of stuff. But that's like walking into a supermarket and there are only grandparents around. You just look at that age structure and you go, this is not sustainable. Where are the babies? Where are the kids? Where are the teenagers? Where are the parents? Middle-aged people? A sustainable population needs representation over some area throughout the age and size ranges. So this is surprisingly consistent across productivity classes and is resilient over the long term and probably one of our best bets for both wildfire and other drought stresses, insects and disease, because it creates a nice mix of openings. You saw the picture, there's nice grass and flowers and shrubs and regeneration in the understory. And prescribed burning is going to be a regular part of maintaining it, which brings us to our second point. As we look to the future and what we can do beyond mechanical entry is using fire itself as a tool. And there's a certain amount of prescribed burning we can do with those drip torches, but there are limits to how many acres of this we can do as well in terms of current permitting that's allowed. And it takes planning. This isn't willy-nilly tossing matches out of your pickup truck going down the road. This is planning out and modeling to get the effects that you want, having the folks out there to light it and contain it, having a plan an initial plan for how you would like it to burn in terms of its intensity and severity, adjusting on the fly as that happens. There is science and there is also art to prescribed burning. And to a certain extent, we have to rebuild that workforce. So it's gonna be well beyond just kind of controlled burning, small acreages, 20 at a time, with 50 people out there and 100 trucks and all of those kinds of things. We're gonna have to go bigger and redevelop the workforce and our ideas and our plannings that allow us to go bigger. We also have to get rid of just kind of the idea of let burn. When we have wildfire events like the Canyon Creek fire, that after the initial couple of days, actually like Eagle Creek fire as well, after the big runs, the first couple days, it becomes a large fire and burns for another couple weeks at mixed and low severity. That's really good fire. We can plan that in advance, but that is not just a willy-nilly let burn kind of thing. That is something else also. If we're going to use fire, we need to have predetermined, pre-planned ideas for when it catches on fire, not if it catches on fire, when it catches on fire. And the conditions are X, Y, and Z. Let's go ahead and ring it out and burn 5,000 or 10,000 acres now out to our pre-designed containment lines. Some of which are existing roads, some are things that we build and maintain in advance. This can tie in with our recreation programs, our watershed programs, our habitat programs, our timber programs, our fuel maintenance programs, all tied to the ideas of these planned containment lines for when it's going to burn. And sure enough, when we get a couple dozen ignitions across that landscape, they're going to burn anyway. So let's take it on and actively burn it, more in a prescribed fire kind of mode. So that's going to be, we got to go bigger and less control and across boundaries for our approaches to management ignition prescribed burning. We did, so up by Crater Lake this past year, we did, it was planned at 8,000 acres. We did 6,000 in some acres across ownership boundaries, across some past burn scars associated with wildfires, and got by and large great results for dollars per acre rather than hundreds of dollars per acre. So there's an economy of scale to this kind of thing as well. So we've got to go bigger and across boundaries. And when wildfire provides the ignitions for us, let's be ready for that so we can opportunistically take advantage of the wildfires, because that's the only way we're going to get in front of the holiday farm style events. That is now a fuel break on the landscape for next year's or 3 year from now fire will burn right up against the holiday farm fire or the Beachy Creek fire scar or that kind of stuff. Those are now fuel limited areas for years to decades. We're going to use that. And when if we just stick with suppression mode, our incident commanders are going to know that and use that anyway. How about if we just plan it right now and start prescribed burning up against those boundaries under much better weather conditions than we had last Labor Day? But a certain amount of wildfire is still going to happen, and a certain amount of this kind of damage is going to be created across. Not all high severity fire is bad. The snags and standing charred, dead trees, they're good, within reason and all that kind of thing. And so our post-fire recovery model has to go beyond the old debate about salvage. There is plenty of moderate, even ground for grabbing things that have economic value, but leaving behind plenty of habitat and not punching roads into new areas. We've got plenty of roads out there and all that kind of stuff. If we're focused on it as a fuels management issue and more broadly tied to our forest management issues, it's part of that component, then very quickly we'll get beyond the old salvage debates in terms of what do we want to create and leave out there, and how is it going to be a resistant and resilient area and a safe zone and all that kind of stuff in the future. How does it fit into fire, repeated fire in time and space? And then some areas might need some planting help. Some areas might need some chemical vegetation management because we've had an atypical burn. Some areas might need some planting. Some areas might need some habitat work, some stream restoration. We can do all that if we're beyond the salvage debate. And we're thinking about what we want to have moving forward and what it's going to take and what we can do now and how we're going to maintain that into the future, including with fire, burning, prescribed burning in the burn scar. This is the B&B fire. If you're wondering where this picture is taken, looking up at Three Finger Jack, this was taken 10 or 12 years after that fire. It's still regrowing. Here is this issue where, I was talking about sometimes the even age plantation is, some of the only green stuff left on the landscape. So that's right here in this corner. There's another one over there. So, there were, because of spruce budworm, there had been some even aged harvesting, up there. And new plantations coming. They had been prescribed burn because of all of the activity fuel and accumulated fuels in there. So they'd done a lot of pile burning and broadcast burning before they planted. And it weathered, when everything around it was getting nuked, it weathered the B&B fire just fine. But next to it, an area that had been thinned, some of those trees survived. Of course, nothing much in the foreground survived, nothing much up here survived. But that's the importance of that fuel part of the fire behavior triangle. And if you have a complex of fuels out there and you mix that with complex weather coming and going through the course of the day and the days themselves, and complex topography, then you're going to get a complex heterogeneous burn pattern out there. And we tend to think that that's pretty good from an ecological and economic perspective. All right, so I'm going to stop at that point and wrap this up with some questions. We've got plenty of time for questions, right, Julie?
Yeah, we do. We even have one that was kind of a holdover from when you paused last. You mentioned My Blue Mountain and the collaboratives.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing such good work, but need a bigger scale. And one of the questions, how do we get there? And then how do we scale that to more communities? So is it just money? Is it policy, people or workforce or infrastructure, all the above? And how do we scale it to get to the level of what you say we need?
Yes. And I think by chance, I've gotten to just some of that, but I'll reiterate it. The things that worked well there were some very motivated members of that local community, plus people like the academic, James Johnston, and the environmental community, Susan Jane Brown, just informed, motivated people. So people is crucial. The mill owner in this case was crucial. The forest supervisor and district civil culturists, were crucial. They all were on pretty much the same mission, and that's what ultimately made that group successful. They would like to have done more, but there is still only so much the mill can handle. There's still so much cost that's associated, particularly with the transport of the wood across long distances and market for that wood, even once it's been milled. So the solution to be able to do more is all of the above. It's going to take some of that non-sustainable grant funding, whether it's federal tax dollars and the collaborative forest landscape restoration program kind of funding, or before that was the Hazardous Fuel Reduction Act kind of funding. But I don't view that as sustainable and therefore a long-term solution. So I would like to see the push for for good land management, and here, and particularly that part of the world, it's rangeland management in addition to forest management, and the kind of the gray area between the two, how to make them more profitable, how to develop the infrastructures and the markets for the materials, so the biofuels, the bioenergy, the smaller milling operations, all of those kinds of efficiencies that the science and the research are just kind of touching on, but at scales that we need investment, and that maybe the upfront investment does come from these kind of works programs or grants or something like that. But we've got to view that ultimately we want it to be sustaining going into the future for our children and for our grandchildren, that they're managing the land, they're using a lot more wood rather than concrete and steel and all that kind of thing, and that we're growing, we're growing our our natural resource needs, and we're growing our markets and growing our jobs and protecting the water and all that kind of stuff together. And it's all those things together.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to encourage people to keep writing in some more questions. We have a couple more we'll get to. First, I want to mention a couple more opportunities for workshops coming up. And there's Wildfire Wednesdays. Next one is tomorrow, the Fire on the Land. And that's with OSU Extension Service, the fire program. And it looks like they're going to talk about the ecology and history of fire in Oregon and what we can expect moving into the future. So sounds like a great continuing conversation from what John talked about today into tomorrow. And then our next Tree School Online Into the Woods is going to be on Tuesday, June 1st, the same time, 3 o'clock. And Michael R., who's now with Benton Soil and Water Conservation District, and Peter Hayes, who's a family forest landowner and involved with a lot of different groups, are going to basically go into the woods and take landowners and anyone that'd like to join kind of a pathway through how they do some of their management. So I encourage you to register for those. I'm also going to launch the poll. So thanks for everyone that's still with us, and encourage you to stay with us as we answer some more questions or write in some of those questions. I think John's given us all a lot of things to think about on a pretty complex topic. And if you're thinking about how you're doing this with your, your land, or how you're getting involved in these conversations. And so we'd like to, as we listen to more questions, but if you'll get a chance to answer some poll questions, we appreciate that. A couple questions there for you. And so, John, I think you've, in preparation for this next question, went back and saw, someone asked in this slide with the two pictures, you have one picture that shows these tiny saplings and some mature trees. How does this represent a diversified planting?
Mm-hmm. So just a review of what you're looking at, and then the question about how this represents a diversified planting. And so this is Oregon Forest Practices Act, private land, even age management. In this case, Stark, I don't know the exact number for this site, but they're not pure Douglas fir, but they're dominantly Douglas fir, 85-90%. But they'll also do planting intermixed in it grand fir and some spatially targeted plantings, like in wetter draws of western red cedar, which of course has to be protected from deer browse and that kind of stuff. But this is dominantly even age management, Oregon Forest Practices Act, green tree retention, snag retention. I don't see a lot of snags in this particular picture, but Starker's is above and beyond the Oregon Forest Practices Act, and does great land management, including hardwood retention as some of the green tree retention. But how does this represent diversity? This represents diversity at the next scale up, where multi-age management has all the different sizes of trees. And if we had multiple species, if this was a mixed conifer site rather than a pure Ponderosa Pine site, although there is a little bit of oak and aspen in many of these areas, but a very little bit, just like there's very little bit of grand fir or western red cedar up in this style. This is just the next scale up. So where the openings and the regeneration are on a relatively small scale here, and we think of the stand as 100 acres that has all of these in it. Here, the stand itself, the opening is 40 acres, and we think, and here's another opening over here, and we think of the diversity of species and structural conditions and functions. Is just at a larger scale, and this landowner is operating at the larger scale, the economies of scale, the history of how Douglas fir is most efficiently and effectively managed and grown into the future to produce fiber. And it's a long debate on as you scale up from probably a minimum opening size of 2 acres for Douglas fir regeneration, 1/2 to 3/4 of an acre for Ponderosa pine regeneration. In this setting, you've got to create pretty good sized openings to get decent growth. starting at 2 acres up to this size of 40 acres, 60 acres, I guess the maximum. The forest protector, Julie might have to cover me there for what maximum sizes are, but this is the management approach for doing what the opening size is where you're regenerating and growing Douglas fir.
And I think this is next question kind of rolls into a similar thread. You talked about fire salvage, and so if we're salvaging and clear cutting and then replanting densely, is that a good thing, or how's that good and bad, the pro and con? And then if they leave big trees that survived, will that help diversify the stand as the ecosystem recovers? Is that actually happening in holiday fire and other areas?
Yeah. Rather than a clear-cut harvest, we could think of this as a post-fire harvest. And given the vagrancies of weather, topography, and fuels, this area, these trees survived the fire rather than surviving the harvest per se. They do represent a legacy structure and a certain amount of function that's brought to the stand because they're retained, and that's why the Oregon Forest Practices Act requires that kind of thing, as part of the even age management. It's built into the multi-age management approach. And I think I'm going to actually go back to my Eagle Creek fire slide, if I can. Looking out that window, white knuckles and all. And show that unharvested, what some of this looks like. There it is. So here's some of that mixed severity, kind of fire. Again, you might even see some wisp of smoke still coming out of this. But given the vagrancies and probabilities, combining fuel, topography, and weather, there were patches of green trees that survived. And we mapped out a fair number of these on the Eagle Creek fire and that Canyon Creek fire that I showed you that were associated with old lightning strikes that burned, up to like 4 acres before they were put out. So it took a little while for a hotshot crew to go marching in there, or smoke jumpers to rappel or jump out of an airplane to go in there and line out that lightning strike as it was burning along. But it was 17 years ago. Most people had forgotten it. And then all of a sudden the Eagle Creek fire comes, burns through the area and lights it up green because it's a patch of green left there because the fuel matrix, the fuel bed was fundamentally different because of that old lightning strike. So we saw plenty of examples of that where the fuel side of the fire behavior triangle really showed itself. When I look at this, I think this is a topographic thing. But a lot of times in raging wildfire, depending on the wind direction and where the flaming front is coming from, these can become chimneys and be the only thing that burns. But in this case, it appears that it's a topographic refugia, but maybe it's an old lightning strike kind of thing. Or maybe this was just when this whole area, after it came over this ridge, the sun was setting and the wind was dying down. And it was getting cooler or whatever. Again, it's a complex interaction of weather and topography and fuels that influence the fire intensity and therefore influences the severity that we see out there. So these are legacies that we can continue into the future. I can tell you federal land management, where when I was starting my career and I was still a firefighter, if you had 30% scorch or something on a tree, it was marked to be removed. But that was in the day when the Forest Service was still looking to move wood, and so that there was a push for salvage for wood purposes, and even trees that were pretty heavily scorched. We kind of thought, oh, they're going to die. And so let's go ahead and salvage them now. That policy has fundamentally changed. They're not doing a whole lot of clear cutting. And if it's got green needles on it, it typically does not get marked for salvage. It's only trees that have no green left on them that are even pondered for salvage. But many of these fires, have tens of thousands of acres of 100% mortality in these big runs. Areas like this hillside or something. And they're not going to be salvaged. They're going to recover naturally on federal land. Industry land, no. Hopefully for them, it was of marketable size and they can come in and harvest it quickly and still get some of their investment out, just for their bottom line and for their shareholders, and that kind of stuff. But it hurts the Weyerhaeusers and the Roseburg lumbers and that kind of stuff when they lose hundreds, thousands of acres of 15-year-old material. So these are plantations that they've spent money and time and they have established, and it has no value. They basically have to clean it off as best they can for worker safety and site preparation, so that they can get a new. They can't leave it as bare ground. It's got to be replanted, but it's got to be replanted effectively and safely, and so they're operating and taking huge losses, because of that. So their priority is to go to where there is some economic value left, and then they're gonna go into these areas that are just complete losses for them. So the public land managers are kind of in a different decision space as they're thinking about which areas they can go into. But I can tell you from my experience with federal land managers is they're doing very little salvaging this day and age, and they actually need to do more, which has nothing to do with their timber targets, which in my humble opinion need to go away, but it's going to have everything to do with this long-term fuels management in time and space, because there's going to be these hillsides in the Eagle Creek fire. They're going to have to burn a couple times before we get back into the historical range of variability of fuel that's on those hillsides. So we're right in the, even though it's already burned, we're right in that same decision space of we probably need to go in mechanically first, and then start reintroducing burning in order to get back to resistant and resilient forest conditions. And it's going to take a while.
So the next question is about someone from a small acreage perspective. Is there guidance for owners like me, 16 acres, to manage Douglas fir dominated woodland for low mixed fire severity without any control over my neighbor's fire hazards?
Talk to your neighbors. We're in this. We stand or fall together so many times. As a matter of fact, your risk, you control the hazard, on your land in terms of what fuel is there. And that's the aerial fuel up in your trees, and how close the trees are to each other. The ladder fuel that's below them that connects to the surface fuel, the stuff that's right on the surface, that carries most of our wildland fire. And of course, it's what we target with prescribed burning, the surface fuels. You control that hazard on your 16 acres, but your risk, that notion of what's the probability it's going to burn and when and how it's going to burn, has more to do with your neighbors and where you are in the landscape. So multiple neighbors, not necessarily just your immediate neighbor. It has more to do with that than the hazard. So I don't want to discourage you from thinking about the hazard and having a resistant and resilient structure for your Douglas fir woodland, and maybe there's some oak mixed in there. So those guidelines are going to be, you're going to want interruptions in the fuel complex out there. So, you can have ladder fuels. You don't want ladder fuels everywhere. You can have lots of trees, and particularly if they're big, but at some point they need to be spatially separated. So there's an interruption in those aerial fuels as well. But by and large, you really want to manage your fine surface fuels one way or another: mowing, spraying, burning, whatever it takes. If you're managing those fine surface fuels, then you'll navigate a whole lot of wildfire seasons. And the good news is, If you have a low hazard 16 acres, then you can get a landscape level event like the Holiday Farm fire. And when it gets to your property, it's going to scorch a bunch of trees right on the edge because it's a locomotive with a head of steam. But if the fuel isn't there, you're going to have trees survive when your neighbors had none survive. Because fire requires fuel. You saw the fire behavior triangle. Same wind, same temperature, same relative humidity, same time of day, same topography, maybe slightly different. But if you've treated your fuels and they haven't, fire behavior will change. Not may, fire behavior will change. It's physics, it's chemistry. Fire behavior will change when it gets to your property. But if you're working with your neighbors and everyone working together, all the better. It'll be more trees that survive and less risk that homes are going to burn and that people die.
John, do you have recommendations of, like OSU Extension and other agencies that people can work with to help reduce those hazards on their landscape? And if they're thinking about how to start doing that work, groups that they might want to reach out to? You mentioned the OSU fire program, and then maybe other ways and pathways forward that they might be able to do that work.
Sure. So you can definitely work with your normal extension agent, but also this new program. And if the focus really is going to be on fuels and fire, then your normal extension agent is probably going to refer you to the Amanda Rao or whoever is really focused on the fire part. So that program is good. But also just more broadly, talking to your neighbors because of this issue of standing and falling together. And particularly if you have a federal neighbor, get involved in that collaborative. All of the districts are going to much more of a collaborative land management model. You're vested, in that. There are real reasons to be involved and for the district ranger and the forest supervisor to hear from you.
Thanks. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in right now. If you don't mind going to the end again, we'll just remind people again to register for a couple more opportunities that are coming up. One is tomorrow with the OSU fire program. And then our final 2 Tree School Onlines for this season, anyway, will be in June. We have 2 more coming up in June. So I encourage you to go on the knowyourforest.org and take a look. We have quite a library of past webinars along with 2 more coming up. And just really appreciate Dr. John Bailey, your time today and all the insights. And I think really got people thinking about some very complex issues today. And hopefully if you are a landowner, you have some ideas and things that you're thinking about for your property and kind of your context in a bigger scale. So John, any last things you'd like to share before we close out today?
Just remember, it's fuel, it's going to burn.
All right. Thanks, John. Well, we appreciate everyone being here today. And thanks again to Amanda for being part of us. And we'd like to, again, appreciate everyone's questions. And we will hopefully see you or have you participate in the next Tree School Online. So thanks again.